It's thinking. All right, so I'm recording for our best spring photo demo. So again, for this project, it is a shorter project. You're just picking one subject that represents spring to you. It could be flowers, grass, things growing, plants, a lot of green stuff, birds, raindrops. It could be related to holidays, in the spring, like Easter or the Holy Festival. So a lot of things happen in the springtime. So pick an object, and what you're going to do is you're going to shoot that object from 5 different angles, or it could be 5 photos of different angles of light or types of light, right? We have soft and hard light, direct and indirect light, or diffuse light. You're going to upload the 5 total photos, and then you're going to edit your best photo and enhance the subjects. I want you to bring out the colors, textures, and possible blurring out the background behind the subject. That is due the end of the day, Thursday, for 30 points. And again, you can shoot indoors or outdoors. You can bring a subject from the outdoors indoors, or maybe you have decorations related to a holiday or spring, or maybe making spring-related foods, or maybe you have flowers or plants indoors that you want to shoot as a kind of spring object. That's fine with me. Or you could, bring some stuff, cut them, bring them indoors if you want to. All right. So yesterday, I went around campus and I took photos of this flower. And so I went and brought my little mister bottle, and it was kind of cloudy. The sun kind of came through a little bit, then it got cloudy again when I was shooting. And then I sprayed it down with mister bottle to give it some more raindrop kind of texture on it, just to make it look nice. And so we had, going around on these photos. I actually took 72 photos, and then I got this down to 38, actually 36, I believe. Let me double check. I think I have a double somewhere. Where's my other? There we go. Yeah. So I got the 72 down to 36 photos. Just because they were either duplicates, I got the focus, the same on both, or the focus wasn't where I wanted it, so I just trashed it, or maybe the angle wasn't that good. And so just kind of showing you, when you're out shooting, shoot extras. I was using a long lens, and I was manually focusing, so I'd kind of focus, take a shot, refocus, take a shot, so that way I had extra ones when I went to go and actually pick the best ones. So this one, I'm actually focusing on kind of the front drops here, then I focused on the back drops here, and then I focused on the middle drops here. So even just changing the focus when you're using a little bit of zoom affects, your depth of field, affects, what focal point you want in focus. These are pretty much, 3 identical shots, just the focuses on different points on the front, middle, and back flowers. I changed my angle, a little lower angle. I zoomed out a little bit. So again, you can zoom in and out when you're taking your photos for variety. I did a zoom in detail. These are kind of more macro shots of it. And then getting even more closer, showing the sections and pieces of my flower. I did an overhead angle. I focused on the little stamen, and then I focused on the drops. So much different photo, right, from here to here, but very close, just changing the focus. So different kind of sides of it. I'm kind of moving around. Now I switch to the other side, shooting from the top down. I really like, this is when it was backlit. The sun kind of came out, so I got some nice edge light backlighting here. It looked nice. I did a closer shot of that. And some verticals. So again, switching between horizontals and verticals give you more variety. So when you're taking photos, a lot of times I'll shoot some horizontal, and then I'll shoot some vertical, just to get more variety and give more options. I did from the other side, kind of changed my angle and focus, some top-down shots, a little more zoomed out, vertical, horizontal. You can see how much a photo changes with the composition, right? This one, we have a little bit of movement, but now we got a lot more rhythm and movement happening just by the crop and just shooting it horizontally. And then these two were from my smartphone. So I just wanted you to see the difference between, when you have the wide angle lens and the 2x lens. I didn't put it in portrait mode, but just the difference of the depth of field. So for this one was my wide angle lens. I got fairly close, got this in focus, and you can see the background's going a little bit out of focus, but it's still keeping quite a bit of depth of field, a little bit more in focus. With my 2 times, you can see I got my subject in focus, and now this is blurring out a lot more, right? And so the more you get closer to your subject, the more the background's further away, the more it'll blur out, even with the smartphone, right? And so if you really want your subject to stand out, you know, you want to blur out that background, try to shoot with a little bit of zoom, and it'll help to kind of blur out your background, if you have that option, obviously. So how I organize photos in Bridge is, you can see up here where it says label, Command 0 or Control 0 on a PC is no rating. Command 1 is 1 star, 2 star, right? Command 2, Command 3, Command 4, Command 5. And then 6 through 9 is for different colors, right? I usually don't use the colors, I just use the star rating to stay organized. So a lot of times when I do a shoot, like the shoot I did for the athlete 2 weekends ago, I shot over 2,300 photos. I then went through and deleted all the extras, like maybe she was blinking or had the wrong expression or the hair was like covering her face, or I already had ones that were the same, you know, I just had multiples of it. I always shoot extras just to cover my bases in case I miss her and get her out of focus. And so I got rid of about 1,000 of those down to like 1,300. And then from that 1,300, I went through and started ranking like my 1 stars, just kind of what photos I thought were good initially. And so I got that down to maybe like, you know, a couple hundred. And then I went through and started ranking all my 1 stars as 2 stars, and then got that number down, and then my 3 stars. And so I got that number down to, she wanted 25 photos, so I got it down to 25. From 2,300 photos down to 25 selects, right? So that's how a lot of photographers organize their photos. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rank my kind of favorites 1 stars. So I'm gonna press Command 1 on a Mac. It would be Control 1 on a PC. So I'm actually going to choose this one with 1 star. This one. This one's cool. This one's a little better. Like that one. This one. So I'm just kind of going through and ranking which ones I like as 1 stars. I'm just using my arrows to kind of toggle in between on my keyboard, like that, and this, and this. You know, some of them I like more than others. Go back, and if you need to undo one, just press Control or Command 0, and that'll rank it as no rating. So this is my overhead. I kind of like this one better. Actually, let's go back for that. This one. Let's go back. So now, you'll see on the left-hand side, I have 21 stars. So if I click on that, it's only going to show my 1 stars now. It's going to leave the non-rated ones so I don't see them. So now I'm just going to go through, and out of the 1 stars, I'm going to pick my even more favorites, like which ones do I think are better. So I'll rank these 2 stars. So let's see, kind of like this one more. Like this one more. That one's nice. That one's cool. That one. So this one I'm just kind of comparing the 2 shots, you know, which one do I like more? I think this one. All right, so now I got my 20 down to 12 number 2s. So I just need to get down that to my favorite 5, because this one we're kind of picking our best 5 different shots of our subject. So I'm just gonna rank these 3 stars. So I have my 2 selected. So I'm just gonna pick my kind of my top 5. You know, which ones do I think are worthy of the top 5? That's cool. I like that one. Let's see. Okay. So then, right, so from my 36 photos, I did my 1 stars, my 2 stars, and now I just have my 5 select photos. They're kind of the ones I think are my 5 photos that I took. And so those are my 3 stars. So I can just filter those out so I don't see the other ones and they're not, you know, distracting me while I'm working. So So I was going to do the first demo using Camera Raw. And so I'm actually going to use this photo. This photo, we're going to bring out, the texture of the raindrops, maybe add some saturation, just exposure on our subject. I do want to control where I kind of add texture and clarity and sharpness. So I will be using the adjustment brush in Camera Raw. So Camera Raw does have a lot of similarities to Photoshop Express on the smartphone. So first thing, if you can, make a copy of it. So I'm just going to right-click and make a duplicate copy of it. So my original and my edited one I'll edit on. And that way, if I mess up, I can just throw it in the trash, go back to my original, make a new copy, and start over. So I'm going to open up the copy into Camera Raw. So I'm just going to right-click, open in Camera Raw. Again, I'm working in Adobe Bridge in the kind of Photoshop platform. So in Camera Raw, a lot of these sliders you'll find on Photoshop Express. We got our warm and cool temperature. I can adjust the tint from magenta to green, depending on if you need to kind of color correct or if you want to give a warm or cooler look. The main thing to think about is how is my exposure. So you'll notice when I make this brighter, you see this red highlight warning pop up. You can turn that off. It just lets me know if something is too bright, it's losing the detail and information in it. Same if I make it dark. Let's see if I bring down my blacks. There we go. So if I make it too black, I also have my shadow warning as well. So you can turn that off as well. So I'm just going to reset these back to 0. But I'm just letting you know why it's doing that red kind of color. So do adjust it, where you get the right kind of brightness overall. You can see my highlights are getting too bright. So again, I can increase the contrast and kind of flatten out the contrast. So maybe you want kind of like a soft look, or maybe you want kind of more contrasty look. Again, if I turn this off, it looks pretty good. I'm actually going to do kind of like a soft look. I'm just going to lower the contrast a little bit. Again, I can adjust my highlights and shadows independently. So if my highlights are too bright, I can bring those down, or I can bring them up, depending on what I want, what look I want, right? So I'm going to kind of just bring it so I get some detail back in there. I can also up my shadows. So if I want to see details in my shadows, so if I kind of wanted a softer spring look, I would kind of up my shadows a bit. So I could add texture clarity, to bring out the texture, but if I do that, it's going to bring out the texture of everything in my photo. Fortunately, my background's pretty out of focus, but it did bring out the texture here and different areas I don't want. So I do want to have some control over that, so I'm going to use my adjustment brush, but I'm just going to show you a couple more sliders here. So again, I do have a sharpening slider, so if I wanted to add sharpening to my whole photo, I could do that. I'm going to turn that off for now. Color mixer is good if you want to change stuff. So this is your HSL. It's the same as in Photoshop Express. I can go into one color. I could change the hue of it. So I can bring my oranges to make them redder or greener, depending on which way I want to go. And then I can change the saturation of colors. Like maybe I don't want the greens showing up. I could decrease those. And then maybe I want my reds popping up more. So I'm going to increase, actually let's do orange, that'll show up better. Because it's kind of a lot of orange, it's kind of doing everything right now. But you could individually affect those colors if you wanted to. And then we do have our color grading. This is known as split tone in Photoshop Express, where you have the highlights and shadows. Camera Raw also lets you change the midtones. So, maybe I wanted like cooler shadows. So I could add a, cooler shadow. And then I can add a warmer highlight. Let's kind of add some orange here. That's kind of cool. Don't have to do a split tone. I'm just kind of showing you some options. So what I do want to do is bring out the texture on my flower. So I'm going to go check out my tools on the right. So I got my crop tool if I wanted to crop it. I got my spot healing tool if I wanted to remove some spots. Let's see if I can get rid of this dude in the corner. Let's move that over here. There we go. That looks good. And then I'm going to go to my adjustment brush. And so the adjustment brush, you can adjust the size of it. You can make it bigger or smaller. You can adjust the feather. Basically, how soft of an edge do you want it to blend? I would start off with the 100 and then adjust if you need to. And then if I scroll down here, I'm just going to minimize that. I can do selective edits. So I can change a lot of those sliders wherever I paint. So the ones I'm focused on is increasing the texture and the clarity a bit, and going down and increasing the sharpness a bit. And so then I'm just kind of doing this a bit more than I normally would, just so you can kind of see what's happening. So then wherever I paint with my brush, I'm actually going to make it a little smaller, we'll add that texture, clarity, and sharpness just to where I paint. And so instead of applying it to the whole photo, it'll only do it to where I paint with my adjustment brush. So now I'm going to zoom in. I press, this is the before and after. So you can see, especially here, really bringing out the details and the textures on the little water drops. So again, try to use the adjustment brush if you can. Last thing I need to do is just open this and into Photoshop and basically save those camera raw settings onto my photo. So as that's opening up, does anyone have any questions so far? And then I'm just checking attendance. No camera, no comments. No joke. Okay, so I'm just gonna open up Photoshop and then save those camera raw settings onto my photo. So same thing if I was working in Lightroom. Sorry, I got a lot of windows open, so it's going to be a little slower. Anytime you're working in Photoshop or Camera Raw, I would close out all your other programs just so it runs quicker. Okay, and then I'm just going to go File and Save As. So if I didn't make a copy, I could save it as a second file by doing File Save As. I could call this thing like V2, like version 2, or Edit. Make sure it's in the right folder. Make sure it's a JPEG, and save. I'm going to keep my quality high at 12 and hit OK. And it's going to save those camera raw settings onto my file as a new file called v2.jpg. There we go. I'm just going to close out Photoshop because it's taking up a bunch of my RAM. And then if I go back to Bridge, so here's my original photo, and here was my edited photo. So you can see, especially if you look at, the water drops, how much more defined they are with my edit. So I really sharpened them up, added some texture and clarity, added some vibrance and saturation. Looks pretty good. And then I was going to do Photo P. Or actually, I'll ask you guys, do you prefer Photo P or Pixlr when you guys are editing through a web browser? Which one do you guys prefer? I had a student first period that wanted Photo P, so that's what I did. Okay, no one say anything. I'm going to do Photo P then. I'm just going to go to photop.com. And for this one, I'm going to edit my photo from my smartphone. So the one that had a bit more depth of field, where the background could use some blurring out. So what I can do for that is a negative high pass. So I'm going to open up that image into Photo P. Let's go File, Open. It's 8114. I'm going to open that. So there's my photo. So you can, do your global adjustments. Go to Image Adjustments. You could change the brightness, contrast, levels, exposure, vibrance, saturation. I would prefer to work with adjustment layers. So if I go down here, this little half and half circle, I can click on that and I got new adjustment layers. I prefer when I'm adjusting my exposure to use levels. It's kind of an easy way to control the brightness and saturation of your photo. I'm just going to kind of move this over. So you get to control the highlights independently, your midtones independently. You can make it lighter or darker depending on your look. And then your shadows independently. You can also control how bright your whites go. You basically bring your whites down to gray or your blacks up to gray, right? And kind of flatten things out. So it kind of gives you more options. It's pretty easy to use and figure out. So I'm just going to bring in my highlights a little bit. I'm going to adjust my midtones And then I'm just going to darken my shadows just so they kind of go a little darker, have a nice contrast. So that's pretty good. This is my before and after. And I definitely want to bring up my vibrance and saturation. So I'm going to go here and select vibrance. I'm going to increase my vibrance a bit and my saturation a little bit just to get these colors to kind of pop a little bit more. And the cool thing about working on layers, I'm just going to zoom in. I'm sorry, 1 sec. I'm going to zoom in. So you can kind of see here, this is the before and after, right? Getting those colors to pop and stand out. Looks really nice. And here's my levels. I'm adjusting my exposure. So the cool thing is with these, I can click on the layer, and maybe if it's too strong, I can bring down the opacity of that layer. So it's just 50% of my change. And it also got layer blending modes that do different looks, right? So it gives me a lot more options working on separate layers like that, adjustment layers. So what I'm going to do, I like how everything's looking with my colors and my exposure. I'm just going to go layer and down to flatten image. And it's going to combine my layers together. So now what I want to do is I want to bring out the details of my subject and then soften the details of the area around my subject. So that's when I'm going to use my high pass filter. So I'm going to go to layer. I'm going to work on a separate layer. So I'm going to make a duplicate layer of my background. So layer, duplicate layer. And then I'm going to apply a filter, other, and then high pass to that layer. So when we have the high pass, we can adjust the radius. It gives us more flexibility. So I'm going to zoom in. So it looks kind of weird and gray. That's fine. So 3 pixels is going to kind of wrap around smaller edges. So it's going to kind of sharpen more. So I'm just going to try 15 pixels as a radius. And then kind of see how that wraps around those raindrops. So you can see every time I kind of change it from a low number, let's try like 35 and see how that looks. You can kind of see how it wraps around differently. So I think the 15 was the best. So I'm going to press that and then hit OK. It's going to do a 15 pixel radius. Obviously it looks kind of weird and gray, so we need to change the layer blending mode. So have your layer selected. I'm going to click on where it says normal. And then the one that works with high pass is your overlay, soft light, and hard light. So I'm going to click on overlay. So you can see if I turn off the layer, that's before, and this is after. Really bringing out the details here. If you want a little softer, that's soft light. And if you want a little stronger, that is hard light. So really bringing out those gritty details before and after. So I'm just going to go back to overlay. Typically, I would work in soft light because I don't want it too crazy. But I can always bring down the opacity, so it's like a lower opacity of a stronger one. That's an option too. So I want to control, if I zoom out here, it is bringing out the details of everything. So I don't want that. I just want to bring out the details of my flowers here. So I'm just going to add a layer mask, or on Photopea it's called a roster mask, this little Japanese flag down here below my layers. So if I click on that, it's going to add this white box here. Whatever white shows the filter, whatever is black doesn't show the filter. So if I invert it to black, it won't show anything. So I'm going to press Command-I on a Mac or Control-I on a PC to invert it. So now that white is black, so now it's not showing anything. And then what I want to do is grab a paintbrush. I'm going to adjust my brush size up here. I'm going to make it a bit bigger. I'm also going to bring the hardness down on the edge. I could adjust the flow to a lower flow if I wanted to. I'm going to keep it at 100 just so it works quick. And then just make sure it's set to white. So on the bottom left on your tools, make sure the top one is white. And so white shows, black doesn't show. So I've got it set to white. So wherever I paint with my white brush will show that high pass filter. So I'm just going to kind of paint around my flowers here. And basically, I'm just telling it, I only want that high pass filter to go where I paint white. So you can see over here where I painted white. If you messed up, like you paint somewhere else you don't want, you can switch this to black and then paint it off. That's the benefit of working with the roster mask, is whatever's white shows, whatever black doesn't show. So that looks pretty good. So again, I'll zoom in a little further just so you can see. So this was the before and after, just painting on my flowers. So I'm just going to go layer and then flatten image to combine that together. So it combines my layers together. So I'm just going to do the opposite now for blurring out the background. So I'm going to go layer, duplicate layer. I'm going to go to filter, other, high pass. And then again, I can change my radius. So I'm actually going to do a little bigger radius of like 25 pixels. It's going to depend on your photo and the details, but just so you guys can see it easy. So I'm going to change my blending mode to overlay. And what I'm going to do when this is selected, I haven't added a mask yet. When this is selected, I'm going to press Command I, or on a PC it'd be Control I, and it's going to invert my high pass. Press Command I on that, and you can see it really softens things up. Almost looks kind of like plasticky weird, right? So the overlay might be a little too strong, so I'm going to switch that to soft light, so it's a little less intense. But you can see if I zoom in, oops, sorry, I'm on the wrong. There we go. If I turn the eye on and off, you can kind of see how it does soften things up. So I'm going to add a layer mask to it. I'm going to invert that so it's black. And then I'm going to switch my brush now. So make sure it's set to white on the top. And so wherever I paint with white will be my negative high pass. So I'm going to kind of do this as quick as I can. Kind of around my subject. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. And just kind of paint this down. And every time I let go, I can kind of see on my layer mask where I painted. So if I miss something, I can go over that. So I just kind of need to do the upper corner. There we go. Just kind of move this over to the side. So if you do need to move your photo like I just did, I'm just pressing down the space bar and it gives me that little hand to kind of move the photo in the direction I want it to go. Let's get that. And then, so I'm just kind of getting a couple spots I missed. Okay, so it's looking pretty good. So if it's too strong, you could lower the opacity. You know, you could do like 50% negative soft light or 100%. I'm just going to keep it there just so I can see it better. So last thing I need to do is just flatten my layers, layer, flatten image, and then I'm going to export this as a JPEG. So I'm going to file, export JPEG. I'm going to bring my quality up and hit save. It's going to download that to my computer. I'm just going to close out Photopea to save my RAM. So I'm just going to call this thing edit, just so I know which one's which. I could call it V2, whatever, just something different. So now, this was my original, and this is my edit. So you can see, you know, increase the vibrance, saturation, adjusted my exposure. I brought out the details of just my flowers, and then I softened the background, right, around my flowers. So it looks pretty good. That one came out pretty good. So last thing I want to do is just show you on Photoshop Express, very similar to what we did with our Camera Likes Photopea. Yeah, it's pretty good for what you get. You know, it's very similar to Photoshop. You could do those exact same steps that I did for Photopea in Photoshop. All those high pass and everything is the exact same way. So using Photoshop Express on my smartphone, just gonna open up. So I have this photo I took on my smartphone of the flowers that are pretty similar. It's just different colors. So I would go into my adjustments, go into my light. Again, you can close this down by pressing this thing and it kind of makes those disappear. So again, I can adjust my exposure, you know, lighten or darken as needed. Come on, dude, it's hard to do this facing your way. There we go. You know, I can adjust my, click on my highlights. Maybe those highlights are too bright. I can bring those down to kind of even. I can go to my sharp shadows. I can lighten my shadows if I want to kind of give it a more softer look. So play with your adjustments. You know, you choose how you want, how bright your subject to be. And so then I'm just going to scroll over to, I believe it's under effects. So this one doesn't have texture, but it does have clarity. So I can increase the clarity. Really kind of brings out details. And then I would go over to the details and sharpen it up a bit. So I'm going to increase the sharpness a little bit. And so then it's clarity and sharpening the whole photo. So I'm going to add a blur to basically blur around my subject. So if you just swipe over here, there is a one that's called blur. And again, you can adjust the size. So the inner circle is what stays sharp. The area in between the dotted circle is the feather, and the area outside will blur, right? So you can adjust each of those independently depending on how much feather you want and how much blur. I think you gotta go on the little arrows. Yeah, so I'm just gonna max that. There we go. So I'm basically just kind of making it a little bit bigger than the subject, you know, kind of the main part of the area. And then once I start increasing the blur, you'll see that the area on the outside will start to blur down. And then this kind of feathers in between, so you can kind of see what's happening there. So that's probably too much. I'm just gonna bring it back a little bit. That looks pretty good. So then I would just save it out. I hit the little export button. And just a reminder, check the pixel size here. So make sure that isn't the 1500 from the last project. So just click on that if it is, and then switch it to the original side, and then go back. And then I changed my quality to 100%. You can click and adjust that too. And then download it to your camera roll and just press that and save it to your camera roll. So just make sure when you're saving it, it's not that 1500 pixels from our crop and size project. All right, I'm just gonna stop the recording.